Today I'm going to try to get the rest of the sewing done on this back panel. As you can see, just like we did on our front and side panel, at the top here I've folded over, I put a piece of basting tape all the way at the top and then folded over about a 1/4 inch section to give me a hem, and then I folded over another inch of that and then ran 2 rows of stitches at the top and bottom of that 1 inch of material to give me a hem. But as you can see, before I did that, I placed this inside divider and the back panel together, and then as I folded the top of the back panel over, I got an inch of material from the inside divider in there. And as I mentioned before, you can see here we got the components that will be used to hang the hydration bladder. And this seam at the bottom of that inch of material did go all the way through all of these components, helping secure them in place. In preparation for sewing the back panel to the front and side panels, I did trim off any excess 500 denier cordura that was sticking out. My next step is going to be creating attachment points for the backpack straps, and I'm also going to be sewing some 1-inch webbing to the bottom of the pack for attaching gear to the bottom. There's a lot of tutorials I've seen on YouTube how to do this, but mine are going to be a little bit different than what I've seen. Basically, I started off by taking a 4-inch square of 1000 denier cordura. I've cut that in half to make 2 triangles. I've put some double-sided basting tape along the bottom of the triangles. I folded a 1/4 inch of material up to create a hem at the bottom. I'm about to do the same here. I've also got 2 pieces of 1-inch webbing that I ended up cutting to about 6.5 inches in length, and I've got 2 metal D-rings. See if I can demonstrate this with just one hand, but I'm going to take the 1-inch webbing, fold it around the D-ring, and then these 2 triangles. I'm going to put the 1-inch webbing along the middle of the triangle, fold the triangle over, and then I'm going to sew a seam along this end, this edge of the triangle, and then down this end. So it's now a day later, and as you can see, I've gotten a lot of the sewing done. I didn't record a lot of the process because I was having trouble with my sewing machine. What ended up happening was I noticed the feed dog on my sewing machine was going up and down, but it wasn't going back and forth, so the material wasn't feeding through. I thought it was a malfunction with the sewing machine. I started taking the whole thing apart, and in the process of taking it apart, I come to realize that one of my kids had just come over and turned the stitch length on my sewing machine. They turned the knob all the way to 0. So that's why it wasn't feeding through, and I didn't realize that at first. And I ended up losing a whole day of sewing over it. So if you're having a similar problem, always check your settings first, I guess, is the takeaway from that. But as you can see, we finished the attachment points for the backpack straps. As I stated, I sewed two seams along this side of the triangle. There was a little bit of 1-inch webbing sticking out from the bottom of that triangle, and I cut that flush, and then used a lighter to to melt the nylon a little bit so that wouldn't fray. And I've tacked these 2 attachment points onto the edge of the backpack right at the bottom. You can see here I've also added the 1-inch webbing to the bottom of the backpack. I decided that it would be best to go through the 500 denier Cordura that basically helps secure the 2 panels together, because nothing is meant to go in between these 2 layers of material at the bottom. And I've also added 2 seams right at the edge where this is going to be folded, and this part of the material is going to make up the bottom of the backpack, and this is obviously going to be the back panel. I've added 2 seams just so whatever I put, if something ends up between these 2 layers of material, between the back panel and the divider, it can't slide all the way down and end up in the bottom of the backpack, in between these 2 layers of material. I've also tacked this section of the lid to the back panel. And I just want to point out one thing that I forgot to do, but ultimately it was too late to go back and fix it, was I decided that I wanted a groove right where these attachment points are, because when I go to attach the backpack straps, there's going to be some 1-inch webbing hanging down here, and I wanted a groove to where I could just tuck it in behind the padding. So I was going to put some tacks here and on this side here, and then seam rip this seam here in between the 2 tacks. That way I would have a place to tuck that groove in. But ultimately I forgot to do it, and at this point, if I tried to go back and do it, it's kind of too late, because I've already got this inside divider sewn to the back panel, and I wouldn't want to, it would be too hard to bar tack through the back panel without getting the inside divider. So if I'm going to do it, at this point I have to go back and do it by hand. I may do that in the future. I may not. I might just leave it to where the straps are going to hang down. It's ultimately not that big a deal. I've also made myself a template out of paper, and I've trimmed off some of the material along the bottom corners of the back panel, as well as the back and the front and side panels. That way, as I'm sewing the 2 parts together, you know, I'll have a rounded edge. And the reason I wanted to make sure I used a template and not just kind of eyeball it was because I wanted to make sure I was cutting off equal amounts of material from the back panel and the front and side panels. That way, when I go to sew the 2 pieces together, as I get up here to the top, the top edges should still meet up. So at this point, all I have to do left is I have to install some grommets along the top rim on both the front and side panels, and along the top edge of the back panel. Once I get those grommets installed, that'll allow me to create a drawstring closure. And besides that, all I have left to do is basically sew the 2 halves of the backpack together, cover it up with some grosgrain ribbon, and then I should have a backpack.